Our next speaker is Dr. Jane Lubchenco, again, another very familiar face to this community. Jane is a distinguished professor at Oregon State University, a marine ecologist with expertise in oceans, climate change, interactions between the environment and human well-being, so many areas. She was nominated by President Obama as part of his Science Dream Team and served as the Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmospheres and Administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and served from 2009 to 2013. She has a PhD in ecology from Harvard. She was president of the AAAS and is one of the most highly cited ecologists in the world, with 8 publications recognized as Science Citation Classics. She is a member of the National Academy of Sciences, has received numerous awards, including the MacArthur Genius Award, 19 honorary doctorates, the Heinz Award for the Environment, the Blue Planet Prize, and was named 2010 Newsmaker of the Year by the journal Nature. Jane, it is a pleasure to welcome you back to the Go Marine community, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Margaret. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. As did that, I really am sorry I'm not able to be there in person, but I greatly appreciate the organizers of this session in figuring out how to accommodate the weather situation and let us participate. Throughout normal operations, but especially during a crisis, science should play a key role in informing decisions by policymakers and managers. Now, we all know that scientific knowledge is not perfect, but I believe it can and should help us understand what's happening, why, at what rate, and it can help us tease apart the likely consequences of different decisions. Now, as Adam mentioned, Congress formally recognized the need to have scientific advice inform the response effort during an oil spill when it designated NOAA as the science advisor to the U.S. Coast Guard for spills in marine waters. And NOAA's Office of Response and Restoration employs specially trained scientific support coordinators who can be mobilized quickly to provide scientific guidance to the Federal On-Scene Coordinator as needed. For previous spills, I think this at-the-ready scientific advice has worked reasonably well. But, as Thad has also mentioned, the Deepwater Horizon spill in the Gulf was completely unlike any previous oil spill. It was unprecedented in scope and complexity and duration, and in the media and public attention it attracted. It was the first spill to be declared a spill of national significance and to trigger the need for a national incident commander. And the needs for scientific engagement were unprecedented on multiple fronts. Fortunately, during the crisis, there were numerous key players who valued scientific information and expert scientific judgment, and who saw to it that scientific knowledge from across the government, industry, and academia was brought to bear on the response. I refer you to 2 papers in the December 2012 issue of PNAS that documented multiple ways in which scientists were brought into the process and science was used to help make decisions. As important as incorporation of science into that response was, there was no ready mechanism to take more complete advantage of the breadth and depth of the knowledge outside the government, to adequately fund academic research rapidly, or to bring non-governmental scientists up to speed quickly on protocols, requirements, culture, and potential pitfalls of assisting with the response. And the fact that many of the leaders of the response inside the government were either scientists or individuals who greatly respected science was unusual, in my view, and not necessarily something that will always be the case. So in the spirit of planning for the future, as we've been asked to do in this panel, I want to pose 5 questions. What worked and why? What didn't work and why? And how can we make sure that the things that worked well are retained and those that didn't are fixed? So I'll provide a few brief answers based on the view I have of the response effort, i.e. from inside the government, but also informed by my decades-long experience as an academic and an ecologist. So you'll note this is far from a comprehensive list, but it's really intended just to provide some food for thought and discussion. So question number one, what worked? I want to highlight two things that are not generally appreciated by the academic community. One, from the outset, many scientists were involved at the highest levels of decision-making, either by virtue of their positions or because they were trained into the process by virtue of their expertise and relationships. This was more true for engineering and biology and physical sciences than for socioeconomic and health sciences. Number two, numerous academic scientists were entrained in the response effort, especially where they had pre-existing relationships with relevant agencies. For example, numerous academics conducted monitoring and research aboard NOAA's vessels and planes in the Gulf. Others were invited to sit alongside government scientists in response centers in the Gulf. And yet others helped populate and expand the emergency response management application IRMA that served as the go-to tool for response coordinators in managing spatially explicit information. So question number two, why were scientists so intimately involved in the talk, and why were some brought into the field successfully? Response one, President Obama set the tone at the outset of the administration by shining a spotlight on science and appointing numerous scientists and engineers in high-level positions in agencies that turned out to be key to the response effort. For example, EPA, NOAA, DOE, USGS. I think it's noteworthy that 3 of the 7 principals who met daily to coordinate the response were scientists or engineers. Very importantly, the person in charge of the response effort, the National Incident Commander, Admiral Thad Allen, valued science and consistently made a point of seeking out scientific information in making decisions. Now, luckily, the scientific agency heads and staff had already forged strong relationships with one another during the previous year, for example, through the Interagency Ocean Policy Task Force. And as Thad is fond of saying, a crisis is not the time to start exchanging business cards. Fortunately, we not only knew one another, but we trusted one another. Because of these 3 conditions, numerous ad hoc expert working groups were established, primarily by PNIC and using his authority, to assess the state of knowledge on topics directly relevant to the response and to inform response decisions. For example, the teams composed of government, industry, and academic scientists were constituted to determine flow rates, figure out how to stop the flow of oil, calculate the oil budget, assess the impact of dispersants on hypoxia, determine the concentration, distribution, impact of oil, etc. So these ad hoc expert working groups were unprecedented and served an invaluable role in coalescing scientific information rapidly, drawing on experts regardless of whether or not they worked for the government. Response 2, as to the why, pre-existing relationships were key to involvement of many academic scientists in agency response effort. Individuals who already had contracts or working relationships with agencies were brought into the response rapidly. So questions 3 and 4 have been a couple. What didn't work and why? Number 1, despite the rapid grant program quickly mobilized by NSF, there were insufficient funds for independent academic monitoring and research efforts, especially early on in the crisis. Because the response effort could fund only monitoring and response, not new research, there was a very significant and frustrating vacuum. 2, there was no easy mechanism for the government to communicate with diverse academic communities interested in various aspects of the bill. As a consequence, most scientists obtained their information about this bill from the media. Even when that information was accurate, it was rarely sufficiently detailed to satisfy an academic's curiosity or her need to know about assumptions and methods. Moreover, despite the multiple meetings convened by agencies or institutions such as Ocean Leadership, there were too few opportunities for meaningful two-way exchange of information and ideas about this bill. 3, despite numerous calls for research into response technology and impact of oil and dispersants on marine life since the Exxon Valdez spill, knowledge in these areas had advanced very little in over 20 years. Now, I've been told that despite repeated requests by NOAA for resources to conduct or fund this type of research, At various times, either an administration or Congress would deny the request, saying that was something that industry should do, and so nobody did it. 4, we lacked a comprehensive, holistic understanding of the Gulf as a large marine ecosystem. How does it work? How is it changing? Basic information about the place where it still happens, I think, is critical to evaluating impact. And I think this should be about more than just patterns and species occurrence and description of habitat. I'm really talking more about understanding the mechanisms that determine those patterns. And doing that requires an integrated understanding of the biogeophysical and socioeconomic aspects of the ecosystem. That knowledge is seriously lacking for most places, and certainly for the Gulf. 5, most academics are well versed in the rhythms, the culture, and the conventions of academic research, but not in the rhythms, culture, and conventions of response during a crisis. At times, conflicts arose because of those differences. Does one share results with the media before the data are QA/QC, before a manuscript is accepted for publication? Question number 5. Taking account of what worked and what didn't work, how can we retain the things that worked well and fix those that didn't for the next responses? Here are a few suggestions. Number 1, modify the protocols that are used during a crisis response to ensure that scientific guidance is sought and used, including at the highest levels of decision making. 2, clarify the authority of those in charge of the response to constitute ad hoc scientific expert working groups to provide information to responders, and ensure that these working groups can be composed of governmental and non-governmental scientists and experts. 3, create additional mechanisms for non-governmental scientists to work with agencies on an ongoing basis on topics relevant to response, to ensure that there are pre-existing relationships that can be activated when a crisis occurs. 4, provide training for academic scientists in the culture, the protocols, and legal aspects of response, so they're prepared. 5, create venues for discussions among scientists about cultural conflicts during a crisis, so that issues like intellectual property, expectations for communication with the media, priorities during a response are better understood. 6, create mechanisms for very rapid peer review during a crisis. 7, create funding mechanisms for immediate access to more substantial funds for research during a crisis. And 8, initiate large marine ecosystem scale integrated monitoring and research programs that focus on interdisciplinary understanding of basic ecosystem and community processes, including the delivery of key ecosystem services. And finally, 9, devise better mechanisms for rapid, ongoing, two-way communication between the academic community and government scientists to facilitate sharing of ideas